Ladies and gentlemen, Sawasdee krab. Welcome to a seminar on Thailand-Singapore 60, Echoing the Past, Envisioning the Future, co-organized by the Embassy in Singapore and the International Studies Center ISC. May I first invite Her Excellency Ureerat Chareontoh, Thailand's Ambassador to Singapore, to deliver welcoming remarks. Please welcome Her Excellency.
His Excellency Dr. Bunnag, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, His Excellency Giorgio, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, His Excellency Sihasak, Phuangketkeow, former Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Thailand, and His Excellency Bilahari, Kausikan, former Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you this afternoon to the seminar Thailand and Singapore at 60, Echoing the Past, Envisioning the Future, jointly organized by the Royal Thai Embassy in Singapore and the International Studies Center or ISC. Today we gather not only to commemorate 60 years of diplomatic relations, but also to reflect on our shared journey and reaffirm our commitment to the common future. Even before the establishment of a formal diplomatic ties in 1965, our peoples were already connected through vibrant exchanges in trade, culture, and people-to-people connections. Over the past 6 decades, Thailand and Singapore have built on this foundation to forge a dynamic and multi-dimensional partnership. Our cooperation covers politics, economics, defense, education, and much, much more. Together, we have also stood shoulder to shoulder in ASEAN and on the global stage to promote peace, stability, and prosperity. This seminar is both a celebration and opportunity to look forward. We are honored to hear from His Excellency Giorgio and Dr. Bunnag, who will share their perspectives on the history and the significance of our bilateral ties. We are also privileged to listen to the conversation between Mr. Sihasak, Phuangketkeow, and Mr. Bilahari, Kausikan, two distinguished diplomats whose dialogue will guide us in exploring new pathways of cooperation and in an era shaped by rapid change, challenges, and shifting geopolitics. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 60th anniversary of Thailand and Singapore relations is not only a commemoration of the past, it is also a call to action for the future. Let us use these occasions to renew our friendship and to work hand in hand for the peace, prosperity, and sustainability of our nations and our region. I wish today's seminar every success and look forward to engaging discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Today is a great honor to learn from the two giants in Thai and Singaporean foreign affairs. First, it's my great honor to invite His Excellency Giorgio, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, to deliver a keynote speech on Bridging the Past, Thailand-Singapore relations through Singaporean views. Please welcome His Excellency with a big round of applause.
คุณบุนักคุณ Sihasak, Ambassador Ureerat, my old friend and colleague Bilahari, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. Thailand was one of the first countries to recognize Singapore when we became independent in 1965. SD60 is therefore part of SG60. That's only to be expected. Relations go back to the time when Singapore was part of the Straits settlements, which had intimate connections with Thailand. Thai rice had always been our staple here. And I don't think our chicken rice will taste as good with any other kind of rice. Rama V, Chulalongkorn, as a young king of 18 years old, made his first overseas trip to Singapore in 1871. Thailand had been astute in maintaining its independence by balancing external forces. That the British gave him an exceptionally warm welcome, no doubt was because of Thailand's strategic importance in Southeast Asia. The elephant the king donated to the Singapore people continues to stand proudly outside the old Parliament House. And his visit had a profound impact on his vision for Thailand. On his second visit to Singapore in 1890, he visited Tan Tock Seng Hospital and donated $1,000 in Thai gold coins. Tan Tock Seng's son, Tan Kim Cheng, was at that time the Siamese consul in Singapore and close to the king. Multiple links connect Singapore to Thailand from the 19th century till today. Big business families have always played a key role, and the Teochew connection was always important. The Thai Teochews have successfully Southeast Asianized Teochew food in Thailand, giving a special character to their cuisine. No, I know of no Singaporean who dislikes Thai food. Singapore's longest-serving ambassador to Thailand was Chi Aoyang. He served 17 years and died in Bangkok. He was born in Teochew, China. His son, Suan Aoyang, who was a great help to me when I was a young minister, and a man who contributed much to Singapore in many roles, including chairing a housing board. He wrote a lovely book about his father called The Barefoot Boy from Songwan, a historic road by the Chao Phraya River. In his younger days, Chi Aoyang helped Lenin Chao grow OUB Bank, which was a Teochew bank, and its main business in Thailand being the financing of the rice trade. As a young boy, I knew that one of the banks my father used was Bangkok Bank, which had deep connections in Singapore. Robert Kwok, whom I had the pleasure of working for many years after I left politics, wrote about how the rice merchants of Telok Ayer Street line up to greet Jin Sokmong Panik at the airport in the 50s. But he was called Big Boss Piat. Piat, really his name is Teochew. Thai businesses continue to play a major role in the Singapore economy. My first introduction to Thailand was in the Singapore Armed Forces. Our links with the Thai Armed Forces became very deep after Vietnamese divisions moved into Cambodia in December 1978. Lee Kuan Yew wrote to Thai Prime Minister Kriang Sak expressing Singapore's support. Although I was not directly involved, I was Director of Joint Operations and Planning then. I was aware of the projects the two armed forces worked on through intelligence channels and got to meet Generals Shavali and Suchinda, Admiral Sabesila, and of course General Prem Insulanon. I remember one visit when I was in uniform visiting Myanmar, Lee Kuan Yew and Dr. Goh Kim Swee. We stopped in Bangkok for one night at the Oriental Hotel, and Mr. Lee and Dr. Goh had a private dinner with General Prem, not to discuss secret matters about the border. The bonds of friendship have passed down generations of military officers on both sides. As Trade Minister and Foreign Minister, I had the pleasure of working intensely with my Thai counterparts. Together with Minister Adisai, we promoted home barley rice in Singapore because there was contraband Thai rice, and having a label protected by law was important. Between us, whether I was in trade or in foreign ministry, Singapore and Thailand were in broad agreement on almost all issues, differing only in nuances. It was always important for us to see the world through the perspective of our Thai counterparts, who had developed a remarkable tradition of sensing the political weather in the world. Thai diplomats are an elite from whom we learn much. And Lee Kuan Yew, in his autobiography, wrote about his early contact with Thai diplomats and about his esteem for them. Without them, Thailand might not have been able to maintain its independence through the years when the Europeans were rampaging all over our continent. Thai and Singapore diplomats, over the years, over decades, have worked together closely on ASEAN's construction since ASEAN's establishment in 1967. While working to revive Nalanda University in India, Amartya Sen, as founding chancellor, asked me to invite Mahachakri Sirinton as a member of the International Advisory Council. I thought it was a bit awkward. I checked at council. I said, how could I have a Rao princess being a member? Amartya said, it's okay, she's a remarkable woman. And when I asked to see her and invited her, she accepted immediately. And in 2014, with a delegation, visited us when we had our meeting in Rashgir, and we went to the ruins. There's a little Thai temple in that vicinity. So I tagged along. There were some rituals. The princess was with the monk. Maybe some prasad or something was handed out. And I observed how members of the Thai delegation looked up for one another. They saw me and asked and invited me in, so I politely declined. Not being a Buddhist, not being Thai, and I felt I should not be going in under false pretenses. But they made sure that the last driver was also brought in to meet the monk in the temple. I remarked to some of my friends, I said, this is remarkable how they cared for one another. And it was no doubt because of the leadership and the aura which the princess had. It's one of the great blessings of my life to know her and to have met her many times. I was surprised and immediately agreed when Ambassador Ureerat invited me to speak at tonight's event. And the particular pleasure of being with the Minister Bunnag and with Sihasak. It's a great honor for me and brings back wonderful memories with the friendship which binds Thailand and Singapore together be everlasting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for sharing beautiful musings. I bought your book on musings yesterday, so this is very nice to hear from you, Excellency. Next, I invite His Excellency Dr. Teng Bunnag, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, to deliver a keynote speech on echoing the past of Thailand and Singapore relations. Please, Excellency. Welcome, Excellency.
Excellency Joshua, my dear friend Bilahari, great honor for me to speak after the keynote address of such a famous Prime Minister of Singapore, who I've admired for a long time. It was actually Singapore which opened relations with Siam in April 1821, when the resident of Singapore sent a British merchant, John Morgan, to inform our King Rama II of the, to quote, the new establishment the British government has formed here. So our relations in modern times go back more than 60 years. And in fact, Siam and Singapore as Temasek has of course been trading for hundreds and hundreds of years before that. In 1821, it was reported that there were 20 junks in Singapore harbour, probably tied up just around here, we got on the Singapore River. And out of those 20 junks, 15 were from Siam. So during the reign of King Rama II and King Rama III, the junk trade between Singapore and Siam was very important. And Singapore merchants, both British and Chinese, were very active in lobbying for trade treaties between Siam and the British. More so than the Chinese and British traders in Hong Kong even. And the Singapore Chamber of Commerce was formed in 1837, and it was made up of both Chinese and British merchants. And the Chinese merchants were very prominent. During the reign of King Rama III, our future King Rama IV, King Mongkut, used Singapore as his listening post to the rest of the world. And he was, of course, very close to Tan Tock Seng, the father of Tan Kin Ching. And Tan Tock Seng supplied him with all the goods from Europe. And most of those goods went up to Bangkok from Singapore. It was closer as well. So, and it was not only closer, but it was safer to acquire European goods, especially British goods, from Singapore rather than Hong Kong. And King Mongkut was an avid reader, so he read all the Singapore newspapers, and he also got the British newspapers through Singapore, the Times of London, and so on. And that's how he opened up to the rest of the world. Especially after the Singapore Chamber of Commerce successfully lobbied with the British government to send a proper British government delegation to Siam. First, Sir James Brooke, and then the famous Sir John Bowring mission in 1855, which really opened Siam to Western trade and to the rest of the world. Raffles' vision of Singapore was to quote, a great commercial emporium. And that's what Singapore was and is today, great commercial emporium. And this emporium was not only an entrepot for Siamese goods, which went on to Java and to India, but it was also a staging post for Thai diplomats in modern time to go on to Europe. So in 1857, the first Thai embassy to Europe in modern times, not to mention the earlier Thai missions to Europe in the 17th century. But in 1857, when King Mongkut sent the first Thai embassy to Europe, headed by one of my ancestors, they also stopped in Singapore. And one of the members of the embassy wrote a report in poetry, in verse, called Ureerat Chareontoh by Moderator Thai, mentioning how dynamic Singapore was. And so in 1861, one of my ancestors, who was the most powerful minister in the middle of the 19th century, paid a visit to Singapore in 1861, and his instructions were to quote, to study and consider the ways and means by which the British had developed and brought progress to Singapore. And so, in a way, Singapore has been so important to modern Siam. Just to get off this trade and intellectual diplomatic relations, ice came to Siam from Singapore, ice, and then of course we have a dessert which we call Lord Chong Singapore. It's really chendol, and then chendol went up to Siam and Bangkok from Singapore. It's become one of our staple dessert. So Lord Chong Singapore is really just chendol, and then we added ice to it, and ice also went up to Bangkok from Singapore. So it's a very, very, very important relationship. On the 21st of October, 1863, we opened our first consulate in Asia, in Singapore. It was our second consulate in the world. Our first consulate in the world predated that by just a few months, and it was in Paris. So our consulate in Singapore was actually the second one. But the important thing is that the first honorary consul of Siam in Singapore was a Singaporean, Tan Kim Ching, the son of Tan Hock Seng. But in Siam, we did not count Chinese as foreigners. So when Tan Kim Ching was honorary, we didn't use the word honorary either. When he was our consul in Singapore, he was also a governor of a Siamese province, not far up the coast in Grat Buri, around sort of the town of Ranong. So it was a Southeast Asian world, which was one world, and there was no difference between the Chinese in Singapore and the Chinese in Siam, and they were all counted as Thais. So, Minister, you mentioned King Chulalongkorn's visit in 1871, and it was a very important visit. And on that visit, he brought a present, as you said, to Singapore, and that is the bronze elephant, which stands today still in front of your old Parliament House. But what you didn't mention was that at the base of the bronze elephant, there is an inscription, and the inscription reads, to quote, "The first foreign land visited by a Siamese monarch on the 16th of March, 1871. So I think both of us, both Thai and Singaporeans, can be very proud of this fact. And on that first visit in 1871, as you said, he was very warmly greeted, warmly hosted by the British. He visited the Singapore Post Office, Telegraph Office, the Fire Brigade, the hospital, Tan Tock Seng Hospital, a school, a market, a shipyard, and a jail. And they all became models for their Siamese Thai counterpart later. But what I would like to mention in particular, especially as Bilahari is here, is that in 1871 he also visited Raffles Institution, and he brought with him 14 Thai students who had a special class to themselves at Raffles Institution, and most of them went back, but not all of them. And some of them stayed until they finished at Raffles. But anyway, what I would like to mention here is that Raffles Institution became a model for our elite boys' day school in Bangkok, which still exists today, like Raffles Institution, the Sungulab School. And the Sungulab old boys, of course, have more or less run Siam and Thailand till today, including General Prem in Sulano. He was Sungulab alumnus. So this connection is very important, and I don't think many people realize that Raffles Institution was the model for Sungulab School. I don't think even Sungulab School today realizes this. That Raffles Institution was the model. So I should say that Thai monarchs and Thais, and many other Thais, have owned properties in Singapore since 1867. And where the Thai residence and embassy is today was purchased as far back as 1897. And it was purchased by King Chulalongkorn, but under the name of the second consul, Sir John Anderson. But it was on Orchard Road, but in those days Orchard Road was really just orchards, middle nowhere. But luckily it's now right in the middle of Orchard Road, and it's probably one of our best properties in the whole world. And many Singaporean governments would like that property. Our excuse is that we would never send it back to Singapore because it was purchased by our great king. Another first that I would like to mention is that the first Thai consul general appointed anywhere in the world was also in Singapore, and that was in 1922, when we have appointed the first Thai consul general called Priya Ranipat Phuban. But he had a Chinese name called Yule, and he had a Thai surname Naranon. And the core family, I think, like the Tan family, the core family are still around in this part of the world. And at the height of their financial and industrial power, the core family who had come, of course, from China, from Shantou, they were really running the tin industry from Ranong to Penang, Phuket, Malacca, right down to Singapore. And at the height of their power, they were rivaling British companies right here in Singapore with their Australian partners. But then they declined in their financial power. But in their decline, sort of times changed. So they have still produced one deputy prime minister in relatively recent time, Ureerat Chareontoh. So that there are many firsts. There are many firsts in Thai diplomacy and Thai history between Siam and Singapore. I'd just like to skip over from 1922 right to 1967, when really Singapore and Thailand were the co-founders of ASEAN. My last point that I would like to address to you, Mr. Minister, is that our great minister was the co-founder of ASEAN, Dr. Thanat Korman, had a beautiful, charming, and kind wife whom we all used to know, Tan Pui Moli, and she was maternal granddaughter of Tan Kim Ching. So these are all the connections that I would like to mention to the audience. The very special connection between Siam, Thailand, and Singapore. And there are many details which I'm sure Sihasak and Bilahari will go into in the second part of our meeting this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Diplomatic relations. My name is Anuson Chinvanno. I'm the director of International Studies Center, which is a unit affiliated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Outside at the registration table, there's a little QR code about the ISC and how to follow our activities. If you're interested in our activities and programs, please take the photo of or scan the QR code, and then you can have access to our website and also other means of communication, such as LinkedIn, whatever, say Facebook. There's several channels. Anyway, we started today with listening to two former foreign ministers who have been involved in Singapore and Thailand's relations for many years. And now we will turn to two former permanent secretaries of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the two countries to talk about the future. I have a very simple question, and I will let them talk. Basically, my question is, we have looked at the past, and now we'd like to look at the future. Diplomatic relations and our general relations are very good between the two countries, but I think the world is changing. It's changing very fast. So what can both countries do in this kind of changing world? What areas can we cooperate in bilaterally, regionally, and also globally? We'll start with you, Ambassador Bilahari.
Thank you. Well, I think as we look to the future, we must anchor ourselves in the past. It gives you a certain ballast, social ballast, political ballast, and so on. I met Sihasak 41 years ago, when we were both junior diplomats posted to our embassies in Washington, D.C. And over the years, I've had the privilege of our paths crossed so many times. I kind of lost, and we stole so many horses together. At least I did the stealing. He's a good diplomat. And I had the privilege of knowing and working with many distinguished Thai diplomats who became ministers. Minister Bunnag, one. Minister Nitya Pibosankram, the late Pibosankram, the late Saroj, Asa Sarasin, and of course, Kasim Singh. I learned a lot from all of them, and that's not surprising because Thailand is the oldest foreign service in Southeast Asia. For a long time, it was the only foreign service in Southeast Asia. But Sihasak and I met 41 years ago at a time of great change in our region. America had just withdrawn from Vietnam not too long ago. It was still suffering from what was then called the Vietnam Syndrome. Vietnam had moved into Cambodia. And I think we spent 10 years. There's a whole generation of Thai diplomats and a whole generation of Singapore diplomats that spent 10 years working very closely together. We didn't agree on everything, but I think we agreed on most things. And we agreed much more among the two of us, our two countries, than with the other three ASEAN countries at times. Right? And that gave a certain intimacy and depth to relations. Now, diplomacy is about national interest, of course, but good personal relations helps smooth the way to reconciling national interests, to harmonizing national interests and so on. And when I was invited to speak today with my old friend, of course I immediately said yes, because among the things I've learned in the 41 years, when Sihasak asks you to do something, it's easier to say yes, because immediately it saves a lot of time, because in the end you're going to say yes anyway, so you must say yes from the beginning. But I was wondering what to say, and I thought of how we met and all the things we did over a decade or more, the very crucial decade of 1980s. And I think our bilateral relations are good, but I think what we can do, and we must try to do consciously, beyond the institutional mechanism between our foreign services, between our civil services, is to try to bring a new generation of both Thai foreign service officers and Singapore foreign services together to gain the experience of working together and to gain the personal relationships that I think I at least found very valuable in my career. Right? How we are going to do that? I mean, we are facing a very turbulent time again. It's not quite the same as the 1980s, late 70s, 1980s, but it's going to be turbulent enough. Great power politics is now going to be the norm again, as it was. Hopefully, the competition between the Soviet Union and the United States was hot in Southeast Asia. We call it the Cold War, but it was very hot in Southeast Asia, right on Thailand's borders. Right? I hope the US-China competition and the US-Russia competition will not turn hot. And I think there's a pretty good chance it won't. But as we worked then together, we can find ways to work. We should find ways, consciously, which can't leave it to the vicissitudes of international developments, which you can't predict and you can't really shape them. But we can have programs, you can have a conscious decision to mesh a different generation of foreign service officers together. The specific areas of cooperation, to me, that is less important. That will come organically once you have these kind of connections.
Thank you. It's always very pleasant to be on the same stage with Bilahari. I did not realize that our relations on ties go back 41 years, so that's today you're pretty old, but I always, in our sub meetings, the ASEAN sub meeting, I always sat next to Bilahari. And I know one thing, that I should speak after him, because he's very eloquent, his talking points are perfect, and that made my job easier, because I would agree to everything that he said. I add some additional comments of my own. So I thank Bilahari for making my task easier those days. But Singapore is like my second home, because he knows it, but I think some of us, my colleagues, they do not know it, because I went to secondary school here in Singapore. I did my O-level here in Singapore. And the school doesn't exist anymore. It's a small school, Seventh-day Adventist on Serangoon Road. But Singapore in the early 70s is very different. It had its own charm. I remember when you drive down Orchard Road, you see the sea, and you had Elizabeth Walk, right? So a lot has changed. But I think when we talk about the relationship, I think one thing is clear, that it's always been a very forward-looking one. We don't have any historical baggage. And I know that on the part of Thailand, we have great admiration for Singapore, because you're always expanding your horizon. You say that you are a little red dot, but you are a little red dot that matters in the region and in the world. So we have great admiration for you, and for the quality of your foreign service. I think the other thing that I think is important, I try to point this out to my colleagues, my younger colleagues, is that the relationship between Thailand and and Singapore is not simply bilateral. It's a partnership that goes beyond our bilateral interests and our bilateral ties. The case in point is the fact that we work together. I think the role of Thailand and Singapore was pivotal in the establishment of ASEAN because the other countries had their conflicts. And I remember what Bilahari often said, and it's still very relevant to this day, is that because, I think this was a statement made by Foreign Minister Rajaratnam at the time, he said, now we are ASEAN. We have to think both in terms of our national interest and our regional interest. And I think this is something that's very important these days because ASEAN's centrality is being challenged, and because we're not thinking about the national interest and regional interest. So, and there are many instances where our ties, have gone beyond our bilateral ties. I think I consider the relationship a strategic partnership. AFTA was proposed by Prime Minister Anand during the visit of Prime Minister Kausikan. And Prime Minister Kausikan supported the idea. And afterwards, the idea gained momentum, and it was brought to fruition during the summit in Singapore in 1992. So that's a case of our strategic partnership. Second is the ASEAN meeting, the Asia-Europe meeting. The idea was proposed by Singapore, but Singapore did not want to host it for certain reasons, because you said, again, you're a small red dot. So a phone call was made to the Thai Prime Minister at the time, and we agreed to be the first host. So we had the first ASEAN meeting in Bangkok, 1996. And I recall when I was a spokesperson of the ministry, we had the Sihasak crisis, and nobody was traveling. It was a crisis of confidence. Economies were impacted. And then I think Prime Minister Kausikan called, then Prime Minister Thaksin, we need to have a leaders meeting to restore confidence. And we agreed to have the summit on SARS in Bangkok. And I was a spokesperson of the ministry, so I had to be the spokesperson of the summit. I had to learn a lot of new terminology. But we did that summit in about, I think, 3 or 4 days. And it helped to restore confidence. So I think this is the partnership between Thailand and Singapore. But now the difficulty is we have to look ahead during a very turbulent time. The region is at a crossroad. The world is at a crossroad. And one thing that I'm a little bit disappointed because the ASEAN that we helped establish is facing many challenges. So I think Thailand and Singapore, as part of looking ahead to the future, will have to somehow try to reinvigorate the unity of ASEAN, the centrality of ASEAN, the relevance of ASEAN in the context of a changing regional and global environment. That's one thing. Second is this Indo-Pacific that we talk about, Asia-Pacific, a lot of potential, and we talk about the Asian century, but the Indo-Pacific is the main arena for the geopolitical competition between US and China now. And what can ASEAN do to help build bridges, to make sure that the Indo-Pacific continues to be the driving force of the global economy, the Asian century. And then what I've noticed about Singapore is in multilateral fora, Singapore plays a role that goes beyond its size. I've seen how you build bridges on important matters in the UN, in the Security Council, and also in other fora as well. So I think that multilaterally, we do have to work together to revive multilateralism, to make sure that it reflects the realities of changing times. And I think both countries, I think we are good at building bridges. We're not a threat to any particular country. So and that should be part of the agenda going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you have identified the areas where we should be working together. But maybe it would be more, it would be interesting if you can say something about how do we work together to work on those strategic issues you mentioned. Would you like to start, Mr. Sihasak or Bilahari?
Well, first, this is something that I feel strongly about. It's ASEAN. ASEAN, we have we're faced with intrastate conflict in Myanmar. Now we have an interstate conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. But I think ASEAN has to really develop not new mechanism, but how can we do things in the ASEAN way to be able to react more quickly to crisis situation. I think that's very crucial because otherwise we would be sidelined. One of my thinking is that this principle of non-interference, which is still the cardinal principle in ASEAN, but times have changed. We're not ASEAN of 1967. We're ASEAN of the present. We're much more integrated, much more independent. And the principle of non-interference has to be applied against the realities of today. And when like in the case of Myanmar, we're not talking about interfering to undermine Myanmar. We're talking about trying to help Myanmar, the ASEAN way, out of that situation. So that's one thing that, and then we sign on to the charter. In that charter, we have many principles. Principle of non-interference, sovereignty, but we also have the principles of good governance, human rights, social justice and all that. So the principle of non-interference has to be applied against these other principles. And I don't know whether Bilahari would agree with me, but my concern is sometimes the principle of non-interference is being applied to justify inaction. Inaction on certain matters that require urgent action. So that's one of the ideas that I have, rough ideas, but I think ASEAN has to relook at the ASEAN way.
No, I agree with you. No principle is absolute in the world. Every principle's application has to be contingent on circumstances and purposes. On Myanmar, I think one of the failures of ASEAN, the latest episode, shall we say, is we did not listen enough to the frontline state, the concerns of the frontline state, which is Thailand. Right? You have neither carrots nor sticks to influence the Kathmandu, which I think you know better than anybody. Sihasak is a very difficult institution to influence any of that. Right? But you can, so if you have neither carrots or sticks, you can only try to influence them by patiently engaging them and talking to them. And that's what we did after 1988 for 20 years. Right? But it finally bore some fruit. Now, that 20 years was the 20 years of actually modifying the principle of non-interference, because what were we talking to the military authorities in? We're not talking about the weather or the state of the world. We're talking about the state of Myanmar. So we did it before, so I don't see any reason why we should be so purist today. And actually, in practice, we have modified the principle of non-interference, not just on Myanmar, on many issues. Right? On a day-to-day basis, we are both song leaders, we know. Right? So I think we have to get back to basics. You talked about ASEAN centrality. I agree with you. We are losing centrality. Some of it cannot be helped because the world has become much more complicated. Our region has become much more complicated. new kinds of institutions and forums have developed. These are new realities you cannot ignore. But you can somehow find ways of hitching yourself to some of them. Okay, I just give you one example that just came into my mind. I think no ASEAN country wants to get involved in the hard strategic containment aspects of the Quad. Right? That's not our way of doing things. On the other hand, why should we not get involved in some way with, for example, supply chain resilience, which is on the Quad agenda? Now, we don't have to accept what they mean by supply chain resilience, and in fact, all the four Quads have different understandings of what resilience means in that context. But we can attach ourselves in some way, in our own interest. Secondly, health is on the Quad agenda. Again, why should we not attach ourselves? And this is something I think where we can, because I agree with you, Sihasak, we have very similar strategic outlooks. And because we are very, you may have not remembered Sihasak. You're always sitting next to me, right? And one day he got a bit shocked. In fact, my own officers got shocked. He said, well, I think we're discussing something on the South China Sea or something. And he said, what was your talking point? So I just tore out the page of the brief and gave it to him. And I wouldn't have done that to any other ASEAN country. And I thought, it's a technical breach of the Official Secrets Act. But these are talking points. They are meant to be delivered anyway. And he was interested in the formatting, if I remember, so I just showed him. Now that's a kind of trust that I was thinking that we should build up. And with that trust, we can do things to find ways to make ASEAN useful. We're going to have to share space with the Quad, AUKUS, SCO, BIMSTEC, all kinds of things are going to be. But ASEAN can still be there, but we cannot be central, we are not useful. One anecdote from the past, Mr. S.R. Nathan, who was ProSec when I joined, and who subsequently became our president, and had many roles in the public life of Singapore. He used to talk about the meeting where the Bangkok Declaration setting ASEAN was formed. And there was a fierce disagreement between Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia on the attitude of foreign bases. Right? Mr. Nathan, who was there, I think he was our deputy secretary or a guy, DG or something. He said Mr. Rajaran at one point got up, also prepared to walk out of the room, which means there would have been no ASEAN relation, or at least Singapore would not have been part of it. It was Tanak Koman who called him back, persuaded him, and found a compromise. And so we have ASEAN. Now, I refer to the past, not out of nostalgia, but to show what is possible if we work together. There are many other things that we can do, but I agree with you, we need to look at this term, the ASEAN way. One of the beauties of this term is it means so many things to so many different people. But there is a core understanding of informality. Yes, we have a charter, we want to become a rules-based organization. That was a necessary step. But we need to look at the rules in a pragmatic way. We need to look at the principles in a pragmatic way. And I think, since we have a very long relationship of trust, if we work together, we can move in that direction. Not abandoning the principles, but adapting them to different situations, different contingencies.
Well, maybe I can move to another area that I think you mentioned, and I've listened to you on this point many times already, about making ourselves useful in terms of ASEAN as a regional organization, how we can make ourselves useful to other countries or other coalition. Is there any particular thought now, like what area we can be useful to the major powers, because they are now competing, and I think we are all concerned about this geopolitical development. and how we as a regional grouping fit into that picture. How can we make ourselves useful to them?
I'll just make a very brief answer. I think what is foremost on our mind is not merely the geopolitical competition between the US and China. I take that as a climatic condition. It is natural for major powers to compete. Right? We have always lived with it. In fact, we have lived through worse. Right? And we are still here. So we shouldn't panic. But what is the immediate concern are the tariffs and what they represent. Right? I think we'll all be making a big mistake if we think that the deals we have cut is the end of the story. It's just the end of one chapter of the story. And the other chapters are yet to be written. In fact, if they are written, they haven't been shown to us yet. Right? So I think it is connected to the point of our supply chain resilience. The US is concerned about over-dependence on supply chains for certain things on China. We have had a long relationship with the US. Thailand longest of all, right? And if we can build on that to make Southeast Asia part of the resilience that they are looking for, not the whole of Southeast Asia, but enough of Southeast Asia. Thailand surely because you are an ally, Philippines ally, Singapore is a close partnership. Without, of course, directing it against China in the way that they would like. I take a bit optimistic view, possibly because I never paid much attention to trade before. Look, there's 40% tariffs on transshipment. Is it really against our interests? In the short run, maybe. But transshipments have very little value add for the country's transshipping, right? So this is, I see as an opportunity to move up the value chain for us. Maybe not so much for Singapore, but for some of the other ASEAN countries. And we can think, this is something Minister Yeo knows much more than me about how the mechanics of trade work. But I think a lot of the transshipments in some things is very low value add now. Do you really want to be hewers of wood and drawers of water forever? I don't think any of us want that. We want to move up. And so I would look at this not merely as a challenge, which of course it is, but an opportunity. A different, to shift the thing. Because of the geopolitical uncertainty, and this is something, I think there is much more scope for ASEAN countries to work together in the military field. Again, not to be directed against any particular power, but to strengthen the regional resilience. I think recently ASEAN navies had their first joint exercise, and there's a lot of scope. And then because, as Mr. Yeo pointed out, ASEAN, within ASEAN, the SAF and the Royal Thai Army, there's a lot of experience working together. That can be a core. Right? We certainly don't consider each other threats. And so if we work together, we can gradually bring in other ASEAN countries, Indonesia. You have a lot of things. There are exercises where Singapore and Thailand work with other countries. Cobra Gold has become a very big thing. Super Garuda exercise has become a very big thing with a number of ASEAN countries. But these are all built on the framework of somebody else, of external powers, US usually, sometimes Australia, talisman saber and so on. Why can't we have an intra-ASEAN kind of military interaction, perhaps built around the SAF and the Royal Thai Army, and then we invite other countries like Japan and Australia and India to come in. And that is a means of strengthening the regional resilience. There's an old slogan, Sihasak, you will remember this, which has somehow gone out of fashion in ASEAN circles. National resilience reinforces regional resilience, and regional resilience reinforces national resilience. It's an Indonesian slogan, but it's a good way of describing the purpose of ASEAN. And we can, and in the new situation, I think we need to do these kind of things.
Well, I think the most important thing is that ASEAN should not be under any illusion. Sometimes we still are under illusion of the past. We were able to bring peace to the region. We created the ASEAN-led architecture. But that was during a different time.
Yes.
And the times have changed. So we have to really think about how we can change ourselves. And Bilahari always talk about when there's geopolitical competition, fierce competition, there's a certain agency that we can develop. But how do we go about that? How do we maintain our strategic autonomy? So unless we really have this kind of sharing of perspectives, looking at the challenges that we face and how we're going to act together and continue to be relevant and maintain our strategic importance in all these challenges that we face, I think that's most important. That's how we can maintain our usefulness, our relevance. But the fact, I think, is that I'm sure that when you sit in the ASEAN meetings, I think most of the time we read our talking points. And even on Myanmar, I remember that when we talk about Myanmar, most of the ministers will say two things. We reaffirm our commitment to the 5-point consensus, then we give the task to the special envoy. But we really have to be of strategic importance. Our role in Myanmar is very important. And we haven't been able to really discuss about strategy on Myanmar. So I think it's very important for ASEAN to be useful, to be relevant, to have agency, that we have to get our act together. And I feel strongly about, apart from this principle of non-interference, this principle of consensus. We will have to operate on the basis of consensus. But can we get a consensus that is not the lowest common denominator? Can we get a consensus that we can arrive at in a timely manner? What do we do? Is it possible within the principle of sovereignty, consultation, and consensus? A long time ago, when I was Deputy DG, we proposed the idea of a permanent troika. But by that time, I think it was watered down by Singapore. So we could not activate it because we needed a full consensus of 10 countries. But that's one idea. And then when we drafted the charter, we thought about having a rapid response mechanism. We could not agree on any kind of formal mechanism. But we thought about the enhanced role of the chair. The chair can be more proactive, can, in dealing with certain situation that requires urgent response. So I think these things are very important for us, for ASEAN to consider if we're going to make ourselves useful, relevant, and of strategic importance.
I'll give you one suggestion, if you don't mind. First of all, I spent a lot of my youth arguing in the non-aligned movement, which Thailand was then, luckily not a member of, arguing about the meaning of consensus. There were very long, almost theological debates in the non-aligned movement about the meaning of consensus. And the general consensus, if you pardon the kind of part, was that consensus is not unanimity. Right? That, to my mind, is already in ASEAN practice, in the minus X principle, which we have used in the economic domain, but I don't see any real reason why it should not be used in the political domain. Of course, you don't use it if the vital interest of some member state is engaged. But I look at it this way. You take the broad strategic, the broad geopolitical landscape. all of us in this vast region we used to call the Asia Pacific, now we call the Indo-Pacific, right? And by the way, the choice of the term is not a politically neutral matter, but whatever you use, you know the geographers will scope. We all face two realities. We have to deal with both the US and China, right? And we have concerns about the behavior of both the US and China, right? And I think the fact of having to deal with both and having concerns about both, these are structural realities. In other words, they are not minor perturbations. They are going to be with us for a very long time. So what's the logical thing to do? And you already see it happening. The logical thing to do is for coalitions of like-minded countries to form around particular issues and work together. Some of these coalitions may have some big powers in it, some may have none, but there must be a catalyst to bring these coalitions together. We've already seen it to some degree. You've seen the first Trump administration opted out of the TPP before they even knew what it was. But at that time, Japan acted as a catalyst with Australia to bring up the CPTPP, right? And you now see UK, which is by no means stretch of imagination a Pacific power, in the CPTPP, and the EU expressing greater interest. In that case, the catalyst was not a Southeast Asian country, but I think, I don't see any reason, because I do see these little groups going in a different domain. You see Japan and South Korea and Australia taking a greater interest in NATO, and some NATO countries, not all, taking a greater interest in our region. But these are all things that we have no initiative with. I don't see why working on the idea that consensus is not unanimity, and bearing in mind the interests of others, why ASEAN countries, or some combination, cannot act as the catalyst in certain domains. Now, what those domains are is limited, I think, only by our imagination.
Yes, and before I open up our discussion to the floor, maybe one more question, because I think it follows on with this being a catalyst on some issues, because I think now we face with a lot of new issues, cybersecurity, AI, technological, very rapid technological advance, and climate change. These are the kind of issues that I think everybody will agree that it cannot be handled by a single country. It has to be done with a group of countries or a global scale. So what can we do on those kind of issues? You have any thought?
I think there are many possibilities. And I recall when I was president of the UN Human Rights Council, and we had to do a review of the council. Part of it was in Geneva, part of it was in New York. And every time I went to New York to speak with the key players, the country organizing the meeting was Singapore. And Singapore was the core of a group called the Breakfast Club. And the Breakfast Club was, I think, Singapore was a convener, bringing small, large countries together to discuss new ideas, new thinking. And so I think this is the kind of role that ASEAN can play. But like in the case of Thailand, sometimes we forget our ability to play that kind of role. And I think within ASEAN, we have this kind of thinking, being a catalyst, helping to drive things, looking beyond just ASEAN matters. I think we can make a difference at a time where multilateralism is under challenge on other issues as well, pandemics, climate change, and so many issues that ASEAN can go beyond ASEAN.
I agree with you. I think we need a kind of mental gear change. I don't think it is what you meant, but I think we are a bit too withered to some frameworks that we develop in completely different strategic environment. ARF, EAS, things like that. They were developed during a very short, historically exceptional period where we thought, or many countries thought, it's not just us, that for one reason or the other, after the end of the US-Soviet Cold War, great power competition would at least be muted if it did not disappear. And that was the kind of unspoken assumption underlying the ARF, underlying the ES, and to some degree even the ADMF plus. Now that assumption is obviously not valid anymore, right? And that's why these institutions, they will still come and attend and all that. But we get too focused on them. We get too focused about matters of form. Who is coming to attend? At what level will they attend? They will always attend at some level, precisely because of their competition. They don't want to let their rivals steal a march. But that means the utility of these things is degraded. So I'm not suggesting we scrap the whole of them, but I think we see them in their proper perspective and do not let our commitment to these existing frameworks blind us to the other possibilities of acting as catalysts in different domains in a different way, in different combinations, right, of people.
The other thing is that we created all these frameworks, especially the EAS, which we always touted as the premier leaders-led strategic forum. But that's all we say. But every meeting, I think we have to have it well planned. We have to really focus on so-called strategic issues. And ASEAN must have a collective position on these issues. In many of these EAS, ARF, we go into these meetings individually. We have our own talking points. We should coordinate, especially on issues that are strategic, that matters to the region. So my concern is that we created all these forums during good times, when there was no geopolitical competition like right now. And then we're still under the illusion that these are still good times. And these are not good times anymore, so we really have to get our act together.
Yes, I agree with these observations, and I think in many ways one of the criticism is that we the ASEAN is sort of wedded to its institutions and processes rather than with issues. So anyway, we have to find some way of dealing with this kind of change. But consensus among the 10 is not easy to achieve. Anyway, I'd like to, we still have some time, so I'd like to open to the floor, and anybody would like to either ask questions or make some comments, you're welcome. I think there's some 2 hands up there already.
Good afternoon. My name is Sun Xi. I'm from China. I'm very happy to see the everlasting friendship between Singapore and Thailand, because first, I have been living in Singapore for 17 years and lived in Bangkok for several months. The second is that Singapore and Thailand are the most interesting countries for me in ASEAN, because Singapore has the largest Chinese population in percentage, and Thailand has the second largest Chinese in number. Yeah, one is about 70%, one is about 7 million. So my question is that, facing the growing influence of China, what are the views of the 2 countries on the China's rise from your perspective, respectively? Thank you.
Can we take? Okay. Can we take the questions, the other questions, and then we will let our panelists respond.
Thank you very much. I just want to touch upon the ASEAN issue a little bit, and I just wonder, I mean, I'm an economist, so I try to look at it from the lens of an economist.
Who is talking? I can't see.
Sorry, it's just me.
Okay.
If you can stand up.
Oh, sorry. My name is Nazul Pavli. I'm from the NTU. So I wonder whether one of the reasons why each ASEAN country has kind of strategy cooperation is one of the main things, but when Kun Sihasak talk about when they come to the table, they have a different talking point. Could it be because the ASEAN identity is not as strong, in the sense that because although we are all ASEAN, but I'm Thai, like my Singaporean friend is Singaporean, but I don't get the sense that we have a strong ASEAN identity that we are. I don't know if I'm making sense here. So I wonder whether has there been any strategy to strengthen that ASEAN identity, that look, we're all in this together, that as the European unions are, as the UK are.
Yeah.
That's my question.
Okay, maybe one more question and then we'll let the panel.
My name is Yong-Wook Liu. I teach at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. My question is about perhaps emerging opportunities for ASEAN. So you talked about times are being difficult and there are challenges facing ASEAN, but we also know that challenges bring their own opportunities. And one area where I can see some opportunity for ASEAN is supply chains. So Europeans, actually thanks to US-China strategic competition, US and China are making lives of other countries very difficult. And this has pushed other countries to look to Southeast Asia for possible cooperation. So Europeans are coming to Southeast Asia for potential production lines, right? Northeast Asian countries are moving out of China, establishing their production lines in Southeast Asia. And as you know, that one of the ASEAN's economic goal has always been to create a single production base in Southeast Asia, which they've not actually put much effort in. However, as you know, that this all requires a significant political cooperation among the 10 ASEAN member states, because they need to decide who's going to do what, who's going to invest, right, who's going to do more value-added segment of production, and how they're going to divide wealth and benefits among themselves. Do you see that there's a political will on the part of 10 member states to do this, when there is obvious opportunity for them finally to do something about single production base in Southeast Asia? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There are three questions, basically, on China's rise, ASEAN identity, and the supply chain.
Can I be very frank on the rise of China? When I was a young diplomat working on Cambodia, when we asked China to do something, China always concurred, because that was a different China, a China that has not risen yet. So again, we should be under no illusion that we're dealing with a China that has risen, a China that has a more expansive interpretation of what is core interest. So we have to understand that we will, at times, when it concerns core interest, China can be very tough and can also be very cohesive. That's the fact. China is a superpower. So we have to deal with China with no illusion. And this is what myself and Bilahari we always mention about how to deal with China. And we got this from a friend, mutual friend, who was the Deputy Minister of Vietnam. He said something which I think is relevant to all the ASEAN countries. He said, anyone who aspires to be the leader of Vietnam will have to be able to do two things: live with China and stand up to China. It's not, so I think that's something that, China is the most important trading partner. China has a very constructive role to play, but at times we have to recognize we will face a China that's very tough in the South China Sea. How do we manage to stick together on certain matters concerning peace and stability in the South China Sea, and try to avoid this kind of the coercive pressure that will come because China considers a core national interest in China. So this is a difficult, it's very difficult for ASEAN and each of the ASEAN countries, but that is something that we have to grapple with. So I'll take that question first.
Okay. First of all, I want to complete the quote. It said anybody who wants to be leader of Vietnam must be able to stand up to China, must be able to get along with China. And if you think you can't do both at the same time, you don't deserve to be the leader. I think that's a general attitude that all Southeast Asian countries, with one or two exceptions, has. Sometimes we do it better than other times, but that is in principle what we try to do. Right? I think China's rise is a geopolitical fact. Right? You know, it's a climatic condition. You know, there's no point complaining about the climate. If you think it's going to rain, bring your umbrella out. You know, and if you don't bring umbrella out, don't complain. You'll get wet. If you get wet, don't complain. You will catch cold, and so on. Right? And that's why I said just now, we must deal with both the US and China. Because if the US is not around, you're going to deal with China in such an asymmetrical situation, you will have no autonomy, no agency. On the other hand, if there is no China, the US will be much more transactional US. It's going to ignore your interests even more than they do these days. So you have to deal with both as a necessary condition of dealing with either. Can I go on to this question, identity? It is a very important question. We like to talk about not just a common production. The two questions are actually related. We like to talk about making ASEAN. If an investment goes to Malaysia, it does not go to Thailand. If it goes to Singapore, it does not go to Indonesia. That's how they look at it. And that's not unrelated to the question of identity. Because there is, I think, a nascent ASEAN identity, but it is still very much an elite construct. It's a construct of people like Sihasak and myself and yourself and Bunnag and other people who have, Mr. Yo, we have all worked in ASEAN. But I don't think our attitudes are shared by the man in the street. In all our countries, even in a small compact place like Singapore, you go out to Orchard Road and you stop a random Singaporean and ask him what he thinks about ASEAN. I will bet you 50-50 that he thinks you have mispronounced the word Asian. Right? Because it's still a elite construct. And that's a weakness. We have not done enough to convince our own peoples that this is important. I think the elites of all of the member states are convinced. Right? But it's an elite construct. Even in a small place like this, right? Let alone a huge place like Indonesia, man in street means nothing. And that goes into the question of why there is not so much real effort to do. Now, economic integration of any kind, including the kind of minimal kind of integration that requires, that will be required if we make a common production platform. It's not very deep integration that you need, but you need some, right? Some harmonization at least, not integration. I think there are two factors that we cannot deny. It was much easier to get consensus when there are 5 members. It's harder when there are 10 members. It will be even harder soon when there are going to be 11. Right? There is a certain obsession in ASEAN. I remember when we had the first expansion, the ASEAN leader that was driving it, it's not a secret, it's Malaysia, Dr. Mahathir. His logic was, I'm simplifying his logic, but I'm not distorting it. If 5 is good, 10 would be better. And nobody bothered to argue with him because we didn't want to, leaders don't like to confront each other too much. So, but anyway, we're stuck with it. We have 10, it's soon to be 11, we have to make the best of it. Right? But there's another more profound factor. It's a dirty secret, I think, but I think I shall be very frank. When ASEAN was formed, the 5 of us, right, none of us was a democracy in any sense of the term. Or at least we were very flawed. it's either military government or one party government without anything, right? But, I'm not suggesting we go back to that. It's impossible anyway, even if we wanted to, and not desirable for many other reasons. But the fact is, they could make decisions, tough decisions, and carry them through. The fact is now, all of us have become more pluralistic in our internal politics. Even Leninist states like Vietnam and Laos, it's more complex now. There are more interest groups that you can't just brush them aside. Right? And that means it's harder to get internal consensus. And that means it's going to be harder to get regional consensus. But again, I think, these are climatic factors. There's no going back. So we'll just have to find a way and adapt and work with this.
On the question of identity, I think we're not EU, all of us, and even EU now, each country feels a need to reassert its identity. But I think what has been missing or lacking in ASEAN that we had during the Cold War, during Cambodia, was this sense of regionalism, and which Bilahari has always said, if we don't stick together, we will hang separately. The sense of national interest and regional interest going together. National and regional resilience, which is the Indonesian concept. I think we've forgotten about that because those were the days that we faced an overarching threat and we had a common fear, the Cold War, and we came together. That doesn't exist today because partly geopolitical competition pulling us in different directions. Those on mainland see things differently. Those in maritime see things differently. But how to retain this sense of regionalism, because we live in a world where we face many challenges. We won't survive if we don't stick together and we'll be hung separately. So that's, I think, very important. Second, this is a very good time for ASEAN to seize the opportunity of this rising competition, the decoupling, de-risking, and ASEAN should be an attractive region, a safe zone, geopolitically neutral, so that we can draw in investment. But still, we think that investment will come, and we don't need to do anything. But that's wrong. We have to move our integration to a higher level. And we talk about single production base, single market, but actually we haven't really moved beyond having AFTA free trade, the integration of our economies. We really have to take it to a higher level.
Can I just add something I forgot about identity? Look, I think identity, national identity, ethnic identity, human beings are tribal. Right? Human beings are tribal. The EU's idea that they have created a new European man is as illusionary as the Soviet idea there was a new Soviet man. Right? For 70 years they pretended there was a new Soviet man. After December 1991, everybody discovered he's Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian or Kazakh or whatever. And the EU is discovering that now. Right? So I think ASEAN did it slightly differently. We are not asking Thais to become Singaporeans or Singaporeans to become Malaysians or Malaysians to become Indonesians or Filipinos or Vietnamese to become some we all have national identity. That's the beauty of that idea that national resilience enhances regional resilience and regional resilience enhances national resilience. It's a more realistic idea than having a complete single identity. That's impossible. But we can still do better in understanding that the regional interest must be some part of your national interest, of your definition of national interest. It need not be the most important part on every issue, but it must be some part on every issue. Sometimes it will be a bigger part, sometimes a smaller part. But that requires better management of your domestic politics by all member states. And there, I think, is lacking. If you want to use the ASEAN jargon, don't forget there are the three pillars of ASEAN: political, security, economic, and cultural. Right? We have failed in the cultural part because cultural part has now become a basket where we throw things so it don't fit into into the other two baskets, right? Whereas that cultural part that can play a big role in creating, while not trying to erase national identities, creating some kind of overarching framework, which we call ASEAN identity.
I think many of our countries have become parochial, even the leadership, because they're very focused on domestic politics. In those early days, it was close ties among the leaders that enabled ASEAN to stick together to make a difference. Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, Suharto, Prime Minister Brain, and Ramos at the time. But they were all talking, and making the decision, and not parochial. Maybe different times, but I think leadership is important. We don't have that kind of leadership anymore. And leadership among ASEAN. Before it was Singapore, with the thinking, Indonesia with its size, Malaysia as well, then Thailand. But, Bilahari, we talk often, he calls Thailand MIA these days, MIA, missing in action. That's our domestic politics. So we need to get things done on many of these crucial decisions that we have not taken yet. It requires leadership, political leadership, and leadership among some of the key countries. So in order to drive ASEAN forward, and I think that's the way we can build consensus more quickly.
Yes, I think one of the biggest issue is cultural part that is being sort of put on the back burner maybe in ASEAN cooperation, because I think we share a lot of things, but they tend to still be regarded as national.
We quarrel about who is nation.
Yes. When someone wants to register something with UNESCO, then we start quarreling. Whereas they sort of share culture. It's Southeast Asian culture. It's not Thai's culture. It's not just Singaporean culture. Anyway, this gentleman at the back, I think he raised his hand earlier. And anybody else? One more? Yes, two more questions. And then we'll get the panelists to respond.
Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I'm Adrian. I'd like to bring, thanks for all the sharing about the ASEAN. I'd like to bring ourselves back to today's theme of Singapore and Thailand bilaterally. I have this question, because through the sharing, there's this common lingo used to describe our relationship, which is called strategic partnership. So I just like to ask, moving forward, because we're talking about the future, do you think Singapore and Thailand is prepared to push the boundaries? Instead of calling ourselves strategic partners, we call ourselves brotherhood. Means we are prepared to go beyond strategic partnership, go into G2G arrangements, go to do a lot of other things beyond just partnership.
I'm Vikram Khanna, and I write for the Straits Times occasionally. Thank you for a fascinating conversation. My question is, to what extent can ASEAN pool some sovereignty? Not to the extent of the European Union, and I totally agree that pooling sovereignty will not make a difference to identity. I mean, the EU has a lot of pooled sovereignty, but identities are very separate. But it might help with some of the issues you talked about. Production, the common production base, the harmonization of standards and so on. I mean, some of these things can be decided centrally. And related to this, I'm really curious why the ASEAN Secretariat is so terribly underfunded. I mean, all the champions of ASEAN, I mean, we say great things about ASEAN, but nobody seems willing to fund the ASEAN Secretariat. I mean, it has a budget, I believe, that is something like the equivalent of a largish hospital. That's all. So what is the problem with doing this? And on the sovereignty, I mean, having a larger Secretariat might enable some greater pooling of sovereignty, if you agree with that.
First of all, I don't think it's a matter of terminology, you know. Whether you use community, whether you do strategic partnership, or you call brotherhood, because sometimes when you call a bro, it's quite an aggressive term, you know. Okay, bro, let's go outside. Okay. So I think it's not a matter of terminology. It is a matter of alignment of strategic outlooks, and that requires trust among the different countries at different levels, from the leaders to the ministers to the SOM and to junior officers, and that requires substantive discussions. I think Harry can correct me if I'm wrong, because you are now the DG ASEAN, so it's all his fault, right? All his credit if it goes right. The way SOM works now is really just housekeeping methods. And housekeeping is pushed to ministers do a bit better in substantive discussions. And finally, everything goes to the leaders, and they don't, even when they go in a retreat, it's not a real retreat. You've got, you know, hordes of note takers hovering around and so on and so on. They can't really have good discussions. So it's not a question of terminology. Right? It doesn't really matter what you call yourself. You can have a strategic partnership without using that label, right? Provided you have an alignment of how you look at the world. The other question, I think, you know, pooling of sovereignties, I think, is not a realistic idea. It's not even realistic in the EU. They do pool, they say about it, but they don't really pool all the way. So I think a better way is what I think, you know, that you have your national interest, because we are sovereign states. But when you define your national interest, have in mind some element of the regional interest in defining your national interest. Then the regional interest becomes some part of your national interest. It will vary from issue to issue, how much it is, and so on. But that's a better way. Putting on sovereign, to me, the EU is a flawed construct because of this concept. Right? They pool sovereignties, but not all the way. So this is something that, you know, you either are pregnant or not. You know, you can't be half pregnant, which is the EU. Okay, you can't just say you're pooling sovereignties. It's rather how you define your own interest. Do I define my interests in terms, at least some part of Southeast Asian interests? That is the more important thing. It will help if we can do that. We used to do it better. Now we don't do it so much.
You know, there's this saying that we can be bigger, larger than the sum of our parts. And I agree, maybe we cannot pool our sovereignty, but we have to share a certain degree of sovereignty on certain matters, especially on trade and economic matters. Otherwise, you know, we won't be pooling our strength. I think that's important. But the other thing is that who do we give that pooling of sovereignty to, the sharing of sovereignty? The Secretariat comes up here. But this is the problem. On many things, we should delegate to the Secretariat, you know, but we don't do that. We always say at every meeting, every sub-meeting, I sit next to Bilahari. Bilahari says, we need a strong Secretariat. I sit next to Brunei, nearby, also a strong Secretariat. But in the end, it's about financing, about budget. And it's a little bit difficult when it comes to budgeting. I agree totally that, you know, we need a stronger Secretariat, because otherwise it will be the country that's chairing the ASEAN taking most of the responsibility each year. And then if we have a strong chair, then we have an active ASEAN. If we don't have a strong chair, then things will be very different. So I agree, but how to get the countries together to agree on the enhancing the budgeting. And, you know, we all talk about maybe countries that are better off can give us some additional funding, voluntary. The other countries say no, we must have equal, because they feel that if you provide more, then you have a bigger say in ASEAN. So it also comes back to this consensus, this sense of equality. among ASEAN?
Actually, Sihasak is being very kind. Usually Singapore and Brunei that object to a different modality of funding than equal shares. Because if you do it on, let's say, something like the UN scale assessments, there will be two countries that are not paying most of the budget. However, there's a way around it, which was once suggested, but it didn't find favor for the reason you mentioned. It was suggested that you do the equal shares for the regular budget, right? And then if you have a project you want, you fund it to the extent that you can, and others can join in if it's interest. But that did not find favor because for the reasons Sihasak said, then the people who fund it will have more say, right? And everybody didn't want it. Now, the question, however, is not just the funding of the secretary. I do agree it is an issue. But the other issue is the professionalization of the secretariat. Right? Yeah, the Secretary General has to rotate, that is without that. But does every other Deputy Secretary General need to rotate? We have recruited, I think, one or two now, Eric, two on a professional basis. But why only two? Right? And there is kind of informally, the other staff also, there are kind of informal quotas, you know. Well, why should we not professionalize it? Okay, we can't totally professionalize it because even the UN is not totally professional, although it pretends to be, because it's the reality of a world of sovereign states. But we can do better. So it's not. I remember also, Harry, I can't remember when, we did fund a McKinsey study of management of the secretary. I think when Ong Keng Yong was secretary. Is it? Do you remember? Even he has forgotten, Mr. ASEAN has forgotten. Anyway, sometime in the Jurassic past, we did ask McKinsey to do a study of ASEAN, and they, if I remember correctly, concluded that even with the current budget limitations, we could do better. The fact is, because of the lack of professional staff, because of the constant churn, I said the Secretary General can't be helped. It's not a very efficient mechanism, right? It could be much more efficient even within the current budget, I think, anyway. It's not money only. Money is a factor, but not the only factor.
Okay, we still have a little, one last question and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much. Ureerat done, and thank you, Bilahari. So my question relates to, given that you advise the EEC, how is that project coming along and what are your plans for your country's most important deep water port, Lam Chinvanno? If I could append a slight a question to that as well. Given that there are quite a number of people and organizations that have strong ties to both Thailand and Singapore, what are both countries' views as to leveraging this asset to foster closer bilateral ties, especially this year and going forward? Thanks.
Well, EEC started off with a lot of ambition, a lot of high hopes, because EEC builds upon the Eastern Seaboard, which is the engine of growth that led to Thailand's leap in terms of industrialization. Japanese came in to invest in the two deep sea ports. We discovered natural gas in the Gulf of Thailand, and we used that to develop our petrochemical. So the EEC is supposed to be the next chapter of the Eastern Seaboard. We had all these big infrastructure projects, the new airport at Uttapao, the high-speed train connecting the three airports. But these are different times now. Before, the EEC was on the talking points of every high-level visit. Now you go and you don't find EEC in the talking points anymore. So I'm just saying that maybe it doesn't have the political impetus that it had at the beginning. But I still am a believer in the EEC because we need to build upon the Eastern Seaboard, and we need to really look at new industries where we utilize new technology, new innovation. And the EEC is where we have the infrastructure ready, but we have to upgrade the infrastructure. But right now, I'm sorry to say that it's not on the talking points of at the high level anymore. We have a new project, the land bridge. Land bridge. Have you heard about the land bridge, right? Land bridge is to build 2 deep sea ports, one on the Gulf of Thailand side, another on the Andaman Sea side, to connect Pacific with the Indian Ocean. That is a major project, but it's going to be difficult to get funding for that project.
Okay, thank you very much. You want to say anything?
No, yes, I'm not going to interfere in this domestic.
Okay. Two ministers, you have any last word you would like to share? Mr. Yo? Mr. Yo?
For reasons not entirely clear to me, as I grow older, I feel more and more an ASEAN citizen. I'm an ethnic Chinese, I go to China, I go to Singapore, but I don't feel fully Chinese. But in Southeast Asia, I may not know the language, but actually this is my region. So I wasn't sure whether it would just me, so I brought my younger son along. He had battled leukemia for many years of his life. And they took a year off, so I brought him to Cambodia, to Laos, to Thailand, to Vietnam, to Indonesia, Malaysia. And I was watching him. I think he felt comfortable. We went to Vientiane, then the Luang Prabang, and then we took the train to Kunming. We were in Phnom Penh, then in Siem Reap. So I know year by year, for those of us who are ASEAN wallahs, it's tiresome, it's hard work, it's disappointing. But if you take 5-year snapshots of ASEAN and who we are, I think we've all become more Southeast Asian. And the international conferences could be first track 1, track 2, track 1.5. In the evenings, somehow we'll meet each other in the same restaurants and the same bars. We're not with the Chinese, we're not with the Indians, we're not with the Africans or Americans, but with ourselves. And that's because we are feeling more Southeast Asian. And that's a good thing. I tried, I failed. When I was Foreign Minister, I said, Thailand composed the national anthem, the ASEAN anthem. I said, I would learn it, I set an example, and I could sing it at that time. So I told Bilahari and Peter Ho, I said, can you get the education ministry to get all our students to sing in Singapore? And if Singapore students sing the ASEAN anthem, every other ASEAN country will be under pressure to teach their own students. I'm not sure how hard they tried, but their immediate response, their quick response to me was, education ministry says too difficult, it's low priority. So as a minister, there are only so many things you can push. It's too tiring, right? So you push what you can, so I left it. But I'm still pushing in a light way, because if we get all school students everywhere, there will be enough fed ASEAN flag in all embassies to know the ASEAN anthem. That's a start. Yeah. But these are just random thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think we're coming to a close of our discussion. I hope that you have learned some new ideas from our panelists. Especially, I think we discussed a lot on ASEAN and the future of ASEAN. Because I think the importance is that, as I said from the beginning, I think our bilateral relations are very good. And so what we should be doing together is probably not simply just to follow us. Some of the issues I think we haven't really touched upon, but I think it's quite going to be a serious question that our younger colleagues here may have to find ways to address. As I said, the question of rapid development of technology, question of climate change and all these things. that I think Singapore has a lot of experience and also a lot of expertise that you can share not just with Thailand, but I think also with other ASEAN countries. And I think we should be working on these issues more as a grouping rather than individually, because they're questions that affect all of us. The other day, I wasn't the other day, I think it was this morning that we had a discussion, and someone mentioned a question of haze. Of course, you have a problem down here with your neighbors. We also have problems up north with our neighbors. So these are the kind of things that maybe we can pick up and see what we can learn from each other's experience. So anyway, I'd like to express our heartfelt